So today I'm going to talk about my research project. I hope you all received the links before the webinar to my report, which has recently come out. It came out in November of 2017. So I'm basically going to talk about my research on the idea, context, framing, and realities of Sikh radicalisation in Britain. So it's got a British focus. But before I start, I'd really appreciate if people could let Vineet know where they're from, because a key research interest of mine is in relationships between different parts of the Sikh diaspora. So if you could just ping Vineet the message and just say which part of the world you're from, US, Canada, Europe, the States, England, whatever. At least I'll get an idea of who's actually online at the moment. The presentation itself. So as Vineet said, I'll take questions at the end. If there's anything very urgent that you'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to take that on board as well and ensure that it's answered at some stage. So let's go into it then. The idea, context, framing and realities of Sikh radicalisation in Britain. Quite easily the most difficult research project I've ever done, and I'll explain why this particular project, how and why this particular project first came about. So if I can take you back to October, November 2015. Oh, can everyone? Yeah, could you just hope everyone can hear me and see my slides? If you've got any issues, please do let Vineet know. So yeah, if I take you to October, November 2015, there were a number of headlines in Indian media, in particular, around the visit of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the UK. And at the time, David Cameron was the Prime Minister, and there were lots of headlines about a dossier which Narendra Modi was going to present to David Cameron, which was going to outline a whole host of issues regarding Sikh radicalisation in Britain. As you can see, the headline here talks about indoctrination sessions at UK Gurdwaras. All these headlines are still available online, by the way, if you're interested in looking at them. There's the whole funding issue, warnings about Sikh extremism, and naming particular Gurdwaras in Birmingham and Glasgow who were allegedly running classes training people to make IEDs. So yeah, a whole host of headlines around this particular time, and even slots on Indian television. So this is we can watch this YouTube video at your leisure. It's a 2-minute segment which outlines 8 points which this alleged dossier was going to include about Sikh radicalisation in Britain, and I outline the 8 points in my report, which basically talk about, as I say, classes are being run in Gurdwaras, which would teach people how to make IEDs, particular funding issues, particular organisations, even things around Sikh TV and radio channels. So there was all these reports in Indian media. Alongside these reports, there had been a whole host of issues in the UK involving British Sikhs. So the mixed faith and garbage issues, which I'm sure most of you will be aware of. The attack on General Bra during his visit to London in 2012. A whole host of other protests. Sikh Lives Matter, the BSD affair in 2004, other protests relating to Satgar issues or a Satgar campaign. So Sikhs trashing their own community centre, it says in that Telegraph headline, and other issues. A cinema in Wolverhampton was stormed and causing screenings of Nanak Shah Fakir to be cancelled in. I think that was about 2014, and increasing links between Sikhs and other groups as well. So lots of headlines about Sikh Muslim issues going back to the 1990s. So yeah, a whole host of headlines. The Modi visit in particular raised the profile of Sikh radicalisation, and I just thought there'd been a lot of all this a lot of these headlines taking place, a lot of these issues being reported, but no real kind of analysis of what was going on behind the scenes. So yeah, there's another headline about an incident that happened in Leicester, which is in the Midlands of the UK, where a group of Sikhs stormed a restaurant. So, despite the fact that the dossier, which was reported in all these headlines and in the TV program, despite the fact that the dossier was actually it was asked about in the UK government. So in Parliament, 2 questions were asked about this dossier in Parliament, and as you can see, on both occasions, the UK government say that in this case, I did not receive a document on UK Sikhs from the Indian delegation during Prime Minister Modi's visit. And again, the question was asked in February 2016. The department has not received any documents on Sikh radicalisation in the UK. So this was very interesting in that there were all these headlines in November 2015, but yet the actual receiving of a dossier was denied on 2 occasions in British Parliament. So that interested me as well as to what's going on here, what's the narrative being constructed, and why is this actually happening. And the consequences of this narrative mean that UK state organisations were also using the idea of Sikh radicalisation. So this is a quotation from Ofcom, who are the regulators of TV and radio in Britain, and they were saying that there was a particular broadcast on the Sikh channel, which again it says here the harm resulting from such radicalisation in the Sikh community. And the attack on General Bra referred to Sikh extremists, and this general discourse around extremism and radicalisation. So, as I said, lots of events, lots of headlines, but little nuanced analysis behind the terms, beyond the terms extremist and radical. So yeah, if you could let me know where everyone's from, that'd be useful, because it'd be good to know. So in 2015, so my position at the moment is that I'm a research fellow at the University of Leeds, which means that I basically I'm there to undertake research projects, and a call for research projects was put out by CREST, who are the Centre for Research and Evidence on Security Threats. This call was put out in November 2015 for small research projects, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to actually do 6 months. It was supposed to be 6 months funded research around the topic of Sikh radicalisation in Britain. So there's me and a few of my publications. And the way I framed the application was that, given what I've said about the different kinds of headlines, I said that I saw 3 different kinds of issues in Britain to date: ethno-national, so that's talking about the India homeland issues; religio-culture, which was mainly about the issues around the separation of religion and culture, so Anand issues would probably fit into that category; and Islamophobic or anti-Muslim narratives, which I've also mentioned as well. So this was the frame I had when I went into the research, thinking, is this the best way to understand what's actually going on? So the report which I published is basically has 6 parts to it. If you don't know where to find it, I'll just move to my browser here and show you that it's very, very easy to find. If you just Google CREST Sikh radicalisation, if you spell it correctly, here is, there it is. It's the first thing that you find up there, and there's a whole there's a whole lot of blurb from me, and a freely downloadable report. So there's a summary here. And before I carry on, I just want to say this isn't, I'm not presenting myself as an expert in this area. This was mainly there to kind of present an analysis of what happened to date, and at least start a conversation on this topic. Most of my research before this point has actually been on, as Vineet said, on religious and cultural transmission. So how people learn about religion and culture. I've published articles on the role of gurdwaras and the role of camps and the role of the internet in how young Sikhs in diaspora learn about religion and culture. So I'm just going to basically talk. Here we go. Right. So we've got Vancouver, Manchester, LA, Oregon, Germany. That's good. This is good. This is a wide variety. Okay, brilliant. So I'll try and bring in. I mean, I'm interested in this whole topic in different contexts, as I said. So I'll try and bring in some of these contexts as I do my presentation. But yeah, so this is the structure of the report, and as I say, I'm not an expert, but I've done this work, and it will be great to get people's views on the report and its findings. I'm easily accessible on social media, so my Twitter handle is @Dr. Jasjit Singh. So please do get in touch. So what I'm going to do in the presentation is I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these particular areas, how I did the research, what I analysed, and what the outcomes are. As I said, I'm not an expert in radicalisation. So the first thing I had to do was actually understand some of the literature on radicalisation and what this talks about. And I found some critiques of the research on radicalisation to date. Mark Sedgwick's written a lot about radicalisation. He says the term generally emphasises the individual and to some extent the ideology in the group, and significantly de-emphasises wider circumstances. And Kundalini talks about the term radicalisation focusing primarily on religious beliefs and psychology of individuals and downplaying social and political factors in order to develop models of indicators. Sedgwick again says that most researchers don't understand, they don't define these terms, either relying on their relative meaning or assuming that their absolute meaning is understood. But what that basically means is terms like extremism, radicalisation are used in media, they're used in general discourse, but it's not clear that people actually know what they're talking about when they're using these terms. So for me, as somebody coming into this this arena for the first time, it was important to actually state and understand what I was actually researching. So I went to the definitions of extremism and radicalisation as per the UK government Prevent agenda. And I'm not going to go into Prevent into depth now, but I'll talk a little bit about it going forward. But basically, this is it's a counter-extremism strategy which is currently in place by the UK government, and they define extremism as a vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. And radicalisation is a process by which a person comes to support terrorism and extremist ideologies associated with terrorist groups. And that's a very, very key point. It's very specific to terrorism and extremist ideologies associated with terrorist groups. So that's a very important point to make. Yep. Okay. Now, looking at the literature, I found this distinction made by Moskalenko and Macaulay as quite useful. They define radicalism as readiness to engage in illegal and violent political action, as opposed to activism, which is a readiness to engage in legal and non-violent political action. So the distinction there is between legality and violence. Those are the two things that define whether an action is taken as being radical or active. Is it radicalism or activism? And this is something I wanted to understand. How could these various things that I spoke about at the start be framed? So research methods, this is something that as an academic I need to make sure that I explain and get over. I used a whole host of different research methods, as I always do in all my research projects. Undertook a literature review of the literature on Sikh ethno-nationalism primarily. Most of the literature was about Sikh ethno-nationalism and around events of 1984. I undertook a series of semi-structured interviews with 20 self-defining Sikh activists in Britain. To their credit, the research council, the funders, made sure that I went through a very rigorous ethical review process. So you'll see in the report that people cannot be identified. It was a case of doing an interview, recording the interview, transcribing the interview, and destroying the recording. And the only quotations used in the report are ones that will not identify the people I spoke to. I undertook a series of fieldwork visits to Gurdwaras and Sikh events. I analysed media in depth, so this went all the way back to the colonial period, I analysed media discourse on YouTube and on various Sikh TV stations and radio and online. And once a draft of the report had been completed, which was around about June 2017, I undertook a series of community consultations. So I basically took my findings out to the community, and these were public events, but not streamed online. But they were basically events where I presented my findings and took on feedback, some of which I then incorporated back into the report. So it wasn't a case of me sitting in a room just writing loads of stuff. I wanted to make sure that my research was actually bought into by the community, and people were actually aware of what I was doing. And this is part of that as well. As I say, I'm not an expert, but I see this webinar as exactly the same thing. This is out there to present what I've done, and then I recognise, and I've said in the report, there's a lot of knowledge in the community which is often untapped. So if anyone has any useful information or knowledge they think is relevant to this topic, then please do get in touch. My details are on the slide, and I'll put them out at the end. Okay. So yeah, these are just examples of some of my community impacts. I presented at a Sikh research conference. The Sikh Educational Council, based in the UK, hosted me at an event as well, as did the Sikh Press Association. So as you can see, it wasn't a case of me, just doing the stuff. I was consulting on the report as it was developing. For some reason, I'm wearing the same jumper in every single photograph, so I need to get myself a new wardrobe. But basically, what I found was that there were a number of different ways in which Sikhs had been represented in media. And what's very interesting is you see how media representations of Sikhs depends very much on their relationship with the state. So if you look at the colonial period, when the British first encountered Sikhs, they often described them as fanatic priests. So Nihang Singhs in particular were described as fanatic priests because they looked a particular way. But then when the Sikhs started fighting for the British, particularly in the Indian Mutiny and in World War I, they were described as loyal soldiers. And then when the Akali Morchas started in the 1920s, 1930s onwards, they were back to being described as extremists and fanatics. I do talk a lot more about this in the actual physical presentation, but I can't use the newspaper clips that I've found because for copyright reasons. But basically, you see how the representation of Sikhs in media, as I say, depends very much on the relationship with the state, and then things change significantly post Indian independence, where the Sikhs are described as loyal soldiers in British media, but then Master Dara Singh is referred to as an extremist Sikh leader in Indian media. So again, the state, it's all about what are they doing in relation to the state. So what I did was in the report, and you'll see all these timelines in the report, and I found this a very useful exercise. I actually mapped all the instances of Sikh issues that had taken place in the UK, which had been reported in mainstream English language media. So I didn't go through Punjabi media because I didn't have time in the 6-month period. But so this is all basically the timelines I'm going to present now are basically all taken from reports in British English language mainstream media. So this timeline here shows some of the protests that took place in the immediate aftermath of Sikh migration to Britain. So in the mass migration post Indian independence, post partition, you see lots of Sikhs migrating to the UK. Most of the protests and issues at this particular time were relating to wearing the Sikh symbols, so wearing the star. There were campaigns around uniform, so agitating for Sikhs to have the right to wear the stars in buses, and obviously the famous motorcycle helmet case and the Mandla Dowell Leap case of the young Sikh who wasn't allowed to attend school with his dastar on. So all the cases from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, early 80s primarily relate to turban wearing issues, and Gurban issues come much later on. Then 84 changes everything. So 1984 basically is where you see a distinct change in the kinds of activities that take place involving British Sikhs. So before this point, Sikhs generally support the Indian state, or I talked to people who were raising funds for the Indian state in the 1971 war. So there's a very different relationship with the Indian state, which changes significantly in 1984, and this is where you see protests taking place in the immediate aftermath of Operation Blue Star in Hyde Park in London, and these protests have continued ever since. And if you go onto the Sikh Museum website, there's a very similar story taking place in Canada, where you see, and they've got newspaper clippings on there. You see very similar protests taking place in Toronto, outside Toronto City Hall. So it's a similar narrative across the UK and Canada about this particular point. And this is also where you see the narrative of foreign links to the movement. So the allegations around Sikhs in Britain in particular, and Jagjit Singh Chauhan at this point in particular, raising funds for these campaigns in India. So mapping protests against the Indian state at this time, as you can see from that particular timeline, and as I say, these are all in the report, you see how the first protest takes place in Hyde Park in June 84 and continues all the way through to 2015. There are a number of protests in the immediate aftermath of Operation Blue Star outside Indian high commissions, and you see various campaigns leading up to the most recent campaigns around the status of Sikh prisoners. So the Rajawana campaign, most recently Bapu Surat Singh and Ghesli Lahir, etc., and protests against members of the Indian state who are visiting the UK. So there's one there, if you can see it, 12th of May 2010, a protest against Kamal Nath's proposed visit to London Business School. So the point I'm trying to make is that pre-84, all protests were generally around Sikh symbols and the right to wear Sikh symbols in the workplace. But then post-84, it's all about Operation Blue Star and November 84 and subsequent issues as well. You also see a number of reported plots against Indian state officials who are visiting the UK. So there's a Rajiv Gandhi assassination plot in 1985. You can read these, but these are all basically, not many, but there are a number of plots against Indian state officials that take place in the UK, particularly those directly involved around the events of 1984 and beyond. The most recent case being the case of the attack on General Bra in September 2012. And you also see some fatal acts of political violence committed by Sikhs in Britain in the immediate aftermath of 84 as well. So it's particularly around Southall. The Singh Duri is shot dead in Southall. Darshan Das is shot in Southall as well. So again, immediate aftermath of 84, and these issues are primarily around Khalistan versus non-Khalistan support. But the most, and this is quite heartbreaking to be honest, but the most frequent issues and incidents that have taken place involving Sikhs in the UK have taken place against other Sikhs. So most of the issues I found reports in mainstream media were about Sikh on Sikh issues. So primarily Gurdwara related issues or ideological issues, but watching social media, I don't think that the UK is alone in this. So as I said in one of my presentations, the biggest threat Sikhs is primarily to other Sikhs, and the biggest threat to Sikhs is primarily from other Sikhs. So this isn't a great slide, but mapping the various incidents kind of, I hope, makes the point this is something that Sikhs really need to do something about. Because this is a lot of wastage of resource and energy in basically, doing Sikh on Sikh protests. So most of the issues in Britain, in particular, and this is probably true about the rest of the diaspora as well. Most of the Sikh on Sikh issues have been in the immediate aftermath of 84. There was political violence around viewpoints on Khalistan, continuing issues related to Gurdwara governance, disagreements around Sikh practices and doctrine, and a lot of personal and factional disputes. Now, what I am interested in, and it'd be great to get people's feedback on this, is what is the impact of So for instance, some of the issues that have happened in the UK, like let's take the mixed faith and anti-garage issues, for instance. What's the impact of those issues in other parts of the diaspora? Has the US seen similar issues in campaigns? Has Canada seen similar issues in campaigns? Has the whole Subculture movement in the UK impacted on other parts of the diaspora as well? So while I'm carrying on, if you guys from other parts of the diaspora can just think about how the British context has impacted on other parts of the diaspora, and we could talk about that at the end of the presentation, that would be much appreciated. Okay, and there's been a whole host of other. So yeah, this is interesting. So prior in the 1970s, Sikhs were there was a lot less emphasis on the religious identity. I'd suggest more on a kind of pan-Asian identity. So it was a lot more about fighting or challenging the far right in the 1980s and 1970s. So there were a lot more kind of Asian youth movements, and there have been a number of other incidents and protests in Britain as well. This I'm just going to whiz through, but this also impacts other parts of the diaspora as well. I'm interesting to see how, but particularly after 9/11 and 7/7 was when there was a bombing in London. The UK government introduced legislation, anti-terror legislation, and lots of this legislation has impacted on minority communities as well. So in fact, before 9/11, just before 9/11, 2 Sikh organisations in Britain were prescribed as terrorist organisations, the Bubba Khalsa and the International Sikh Youth Federation, and that obviously impacts on members of those organisations. I'm happy to talk about this after the presentation, but yeah, all I'm saying is that legislation and context has had an impact as well. So representations of Sikhs in British media. So as I said, this is to kind of sum up. You see discourse around religious symbols. Sawn Singh Jolly was an individual who threatened to set himself on fire if his employers didn't let him wear a dastar to work. That wasn't reported in UK media as an extremist act, which I think it would be now. So that's interesting about context. 1984, you see the terms extremist, militant, separatists emerging again. Fundamentalists, Sikh fundamentalists really emerges in response to the framing of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran as an Islamic fundamentalist. So again, context is very important. And then you see extremism, terrorism, fundamentalism, radicalisation appearing in the post 9/11 7/7 context as well. I hope this is going okay. No one's logged out yet, so I'm hoping this is still interesting. If anyone's got any questions to say, do send them through, and I'll cover them if I can. Alongside representations in British media, this isn't something I looked at in depth, but representations of Sikhs in Indian media have been examined as well. There's a paper in particular which talks about representations of Sikhs in Indian media, which I'm just going to show you where that is. It's this one here. I can send the link on, but yeah, the role of media in the study. Yeah, so it talks about representations of media of Sikhs in Indian media, but that's a good paper to look at if you're interested. So now I'm gonna just whiz through what I found, and as I kind of explained at the start, I didn't want this to be a study of purely of religious factors. Given that the people talking about radicalisation have said that there's a need to examine political narratives, religious narratives, and social and cultural issues. This is what I do in the report in a lot more depth. I'm just going to whiz through a few of these issues in the time that remains, which is whizzing by. Wow. Okay. So the main political narrative, these are all narratives which cause Sikhs to mobilise. Let's put it that way, which have led to some of the issues which have been reported in mainstream British media. And the main political narrative is all around 84. So as I said before, one of my respondents said that that they used to raise funds for India in the 70s, and Darshan Singh Tatla, who's done a lot of work on Sikh ethno-nationalism, said that prior to June 84, the idea of a Sikh homeland was primarily a fringe idea, but then Operation Blue Star really changed everything. Again, as well as June 84, November 84, issues about looking for, as respondents 3 saying there, it's been 33 years and still no justice. So the narrative around justice was very strong and came through very strongly. So that was something that the respondents talked about as well, and post 84 issues as well. As respondent 10 is talking about seeking justice. And so in terms of activism, this was really 84 was the main political issue. So there was no issue with the West per se. There was no issue with there wasn't even any issue with for a lot of people with the Indian state as a whole. A lot of it was about 84 and the circumstances which led to the occurrences in 1984 and the lack of justice for a lot of the respondents. So that was the main political narrative. And this is why you see continued protests. This is why you see continued remembrance marches. So the first remembrance march, as I showed, took place in June 84 and has happened every year since. And it seems to be something that the Sikh community want to keep going. And the point I'm trying to make is there are lots of different reasons why people attend these marches. It's not as if you can put everyone into the same kind of pot, which is a lot of what this reporting around extremism and radicalism tries to do. A whole host of religious narratives as well. And just to make it clear, I'm not here to judge the narratives. I'm not here to examine the truth claims behind any of the narratives. This was simply a first stage exercise in understanding which narratives cause Sikhs to mobilize around particular issues. So, and here we know there's not a clear distinction between religion and politics. So, as says them, Miri Biri, but what I'm saying is that these are all narratives that exist within the Sikh tradition. So these are the ones which kind of came through more than any other. And you see, the whole. So recently, the number of Biadbi cases that have taken place in the Punjab and how these have been reported in the diaspora and the consequences of that. So the whole Black Diwali campaign from a couple of years ago. This, as I say, this has had consequences in other parts of the diaspora as well. So, a quote from Respondent 1, who is actually so Respondent 1 takes part in protests, and the strength of feeling about the Guru Granth Sahib Ji came through for a lot of respondents. And that was really interesting. I don't think this is something that Sikhs on the whole talk about or even promote, because the term holy book means something very different in a primarily Western context. And I think this is a point that I make in the report as a whole, in that it's important for Sikhs to start using their own language when discussing Sikh topics. So if we are talking about religious institutions, we should talk about gurdwaras and not Sikh temples, because I'm not sure what a Sikh temple is. But if you talk about a gurdwara, the word guru is there in the word itself, so it automatically emphasizes the importance of the guru for the Sikh community. So it's a small point, but I think the whole thing about orthodoxy and conservative, and these aren't really terms that we have in our tradition. If you want to talk about Amritdhari Sikhs, you can talk about Amritdhari Sikhs, and you can explain what an Amritdhari Sikh is. But the framing of Sikh issues in non-Sikh terms has consequences, which I will come on to very, very soon. So this is all about this. This was a response about the whole Biadbi incidents. Another big issue was contested authority. Now we all know this. The status of the Akali Takht Sahib and its links to the government, etc. So edicts, hukamnamas, and the fact that there's no clear process as to the dissemination of these seem to be a reoccurring issue. So this is a quotation from somebody who took part in a protest, primarily because she felt it was her responsibility to uphold a hukamnama of the Akali Takht. I'm not going to say more about that now. Miri Piri came through a lot, so the Sikhs' responsibility to get involved in society and not just be concerned about their own religiosity. So Sikhi is never a spectator sport. Society, community, So this was very, very interesting. This came through from a number of the respondents, so that they felt it as they felt it was their duty as Sikhs to challenge oppression or undertake some kind of activism purely as a result of being a Sikh. Okay, this is a very, very important point now. So Morchas, I talked about Morchas already, and the kind of the history of Morchas, the Akali Morcha, the way that the Jeto Morcha, the way that Sikhs use Morcha in general to mobilise around particular issues, and how this is kind of carried on to the modern day. Now, this point was something that I kind of learned before, and I learned through the project. And this is why I spoke about Sikhs being aware of their terms. So a number of respondents highlighted the role played by Shaheeds in resisting those attacking the Sikh faith. Now, Cynthia Mahmood talks about the distinction between Islamic notions of Shaheedi and Sikh notions of Shaheedi. I'm using the word martyrdom there. And what she says is that though the concept of the righteous martyr Shaheed is related to Islam, death in a holy war for Sikhs is not conceptualized as some kind of entry ticket to paradise. Martyrdom in the Sikh tradition is primarily an act of resistance, where resistance to injustice is an existential stance as something one does as a mode of worship with no other necessary aim than the fact of resistance itself. Now that's a very, very important quotation for a number of reasons. Firstly is that if we use the word martyrdom across religious traditions, the fact that it may mean different things is often lost. So Sikhs need to be careful when terms are being used to describe their tradition, to be aware of what that term actually means. And secondly, the importance of resistance as opposed to this being something that's after life. So the very act of resistance itself is what makes this person a Shaheed, not some idea of what they're going to get afterwards. Yet, the point I'm trying to make is that the same word is used, martyrdom. So again, if you're using the term orthodox, an Orthodox Jew means something very different to an Orthodox Sikh. So why even use the term? Why not use the term Amritdhari? And I think a lot of the consequences of I think we face a lot of issues by not being confident enough to use our own terms. So as I said at the start, Sikh temples really, it doesn't do anybody any favors. Okay, so as I say, apologies for whizzing through this, but I've got 10 minutes to go. Wow. Okay, so now a little bit on social and cultural issues, and I'm not going to cover all of these, but I'm going to cover some of the issues that came out, which weren't political, which was all 1984, weren't specifically religious, but some of the other reasons why some of the respondents and some of the literature explains why people may feel the need to mobilize. And one in particular was this whole notion of honor, is it masculinity and vulnerability. Now, this is a quote from somebody who participates in protests, and he, as he says there, he is a monastic. He has a haircut. And one question that's often asked is, these guys protesting weddings, for instance, they don't even look Sikh or whatever. This I'm just paraphrasing what people have said. But what's interesting here is what he says at the end. It's all about pride and honor and to be defenders of the faith. So this is a link to masculinity, and he kind of defines himself in those terms as being a defender of the faith. And there is a lot of discussion in the literature at the moment about a crisis of masculinity, primarily driven by changes in the labour market, including the replacement of labour-intensive industries with office work. So some I'm positing out there if it's possible. Some may be participating in these protests to demonstrate their masculinity, given that Sikh masculinities have been constructed in hyper-masculine martial Sikh warrior terms, particularly as a consequence of the colonial encounter. So is this a case of people feeling they have to live to a particular type or present themselves in a particular way? A lot of the people participating in some of these protests have histories of vulnerability, and this isn't something that we talk about much as a community, but this is a quote, and it's available on YouTube, so it's publicly out there, from Deepa Singh of Sikh Youth UK, who were involved in the Leamington Spa mixed faith and undergarage protests. And you can see from the quote, he's talking about his dad, being alcoholic, domestic violence is in there, drug use is in there, so there are lots of issues beyond the political and religious which lead people to participate in some of these campaigns and incidents. And I think this is something that we need to kind of look at going forward, and not just present to the community as this very happy, jolly place where everything works very well. Sikh Youth UK themselves actually are looking to tackle some of these issues. They run workshops for alcoholics and the like. So people are talking about these things now, but the consequences of this appear to be that violence in particular can become normalized for certain young people, and that's important to recognize. So the way in which honour plays out, among Sikh activists, I found was that firstly, the need for them to constantly maintain their honour in activist circles by playing a part in these circles. There's lots of discourse around protecting women in particular, which is commented on as well. So that they feel that it is their role to protect the honour of Sikh women, and this is a very gendered concept. And as I've already mentioned, a number of these individuals have personal issues regarding substance addiction and mental health problems, and not receiving medical attention in order to maintain the izzat of their families. So very, very complex. I haven't done it justice at all, but the point I'm trying to make is that this is something that is something that really needs to be looked at. The whole area of changing masculinities, vulnerability, and honour, and its impact on Sikhs growing up in diaspora, for instance. Gender was very interesting. Few Sikh females in Britain convicted of committing acts of violence. And the females I spoke to did talk about the fact that roles were still very gendered in the Sikh community. So the female is expected to go home and look after the kids, whereas the men can basically step out and do other things. This quote always gets a laugh. Sikh men have got a bit more flexible and disposable time. If I had to sit down for 2 hours at a protest, the female's going to look at that and think, in 2 hours I can get 10 to 15 jobs done. Forget about sitting down for one meeting. That's why I hate going to Gurdwara politics or Sikh politics. Sitting down for a 3-hour meeting and getting one action point, that's a waste of time. But the point, I think the serious point behind that is to think about how Sikh organisations can facilitate the involvement of a variety of participants beyond the usual suspects, beyond the kind of older generation. We know what the photographs look like of representatives. They're generally the same demographic. So given that we're in a technological age, I think it's important for us to think about how things can be facilitated whereby people can get involved in discussions without having to maybe physically travel to these meetings. And what's interesting is what I saw female Sikh activists in particular beginning to highlight that certain issues such as HPV, domestic violence and the like are rarely sufficiently addressed by Sikh organisations and institutions. So again, another important reason to ensure that our representation and decision making involves all parts of the wider Sikh community. Okay, so last 5 minutes, I think, or I'm not sure how much longer. So I looked at different ways in which some of the narratives are transmitted. And this has been an ongoing research interest of mine, as I explained. I'm not going to talk about all of these now. Excuse me. But yeah, I have written articles about some of these, which are all on my website, which I'm happy to share at the end. Just drop me an email. But I'm going to talk about so the protests, for instance, are very, very important in keeping the narratives going. And you see, so this is a photograph I took from the 2016 Hyde Park protests. You see people walking through the park with these various placards. So as a means of transmission, these are very, very, very important. I've turned to the Sikh rebellion subculture. So the whole notion of the whole kind of subculture of wearing these kinds of T-shirts and and this the whole kind of music subculture as well was interesting. It's not stuff that I listened to a lot, but a lot of the respondents said that it was that they often had this on in their cars. People were talking about the fact that it made them feel very emotional. They learnt a lot from some of the tracks as well. So this appears to be an increasingly important way in which people are learning about some of these issues and narratives. And the main kind of some of the main focuses are the need for justice for 84, valorizing those who've taken justice, and defending the faith. So some of the quotes kind of linked to some of the narratives that come out of the music. So to summarize, I started this off thinking that there was this, or proposing that there was this, three pronged typology of Sikh activism in Britain, this ethno-national, religio-cultural, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic. But I've kind of changed that a bit now. So having examined what's taking place, I'm now proposing there's actually 5 kinds of Sikh activism. So the first being human rights and social justice. So this kind of activism is basically around, as it says, social justice, focusing on challenging of discrimination faced by Sikhs in relation to the maintenance of the 5Ks and the staff, for instance, human rights abuses faced by Sikhs post 84. So this kind of involves providing online resources, providing physical aid relief, so Khalsa aid, for instance, pursuing legal channels to investigate human rights abuses. So I'd include the work of INSAF and other organisations in this category. Food banks, which we've seen a large increase in Britain. I'd include all those kinds of activism in this particular category. And this is driven by the concepts of Seva, Miri Piri, and Langar in particular. Second group I'd suggest are what I term religious enforcement. So this is generally around organising around campaigns which target Gurdwaras for not obeying the Sikh Maryada and Akal Takat edicts. So presented primarily as enforcing Sikh practices. So this would also include protesting preachers as well. And I think a point to make is, although, so if you take the mixed faith and Anandgaraj protest, a lot of people I spoke to supported the thinking behind the protest, or the need to enforce or adhere to Akal Takat edicts, but they didn't support the protesting of people's weddings. So fewer, sorry, excuse me. Although many Sikhs agree with the need to understand the meaning behind these practices, fewer agree with the use of violence. Sorry, my voice is going on. Okay, the third category is that of diasporic nationalism. And these are the ones who publicly articulate the need for Khalistan as a sovereign and independent Sikh state, by providing educational resources and by organising conferences and events and exhibitions, etc. Now, although they do this, there doesn't really seem to be any workable strategy to achieve their aim. But so it's primarily around education, and the ones I spoke to said that they were doing this because they didn't find any talk about the events of 84 in mainstream media or anywhere else. So they felt it was their responsibility to raise the profile of some of the issues around 84. So this kind of activism is most publicly prominent in the form of rallies and protests, and it can be viewed as a meaning-making practice and a form of self-articulation and a way in which some young Sikhs, some Sikhs in general, articulate their Sikh identities. Community defence. So this focuses on defending the Sikh community against the real or perceived threats of the Indian state, Muslim conversion and grooming gangs, modernity, people marrying out of the faith. And this is where you would possibly get vigilantism. So this is the category where you may get vigilante actions taking place. And kind of underpinning all of these various issues are personal and factional disputes. My voice has come back now, thankfully. So the point I'm trying to make is that looking at an incident, the people participate in incidents for various different reasons. So if you look at the mixed faith and undergarage protests, some would be attending those for religious enforcement reasons, where the key driver would be maintaining the authenticity of the undergarage. Others would be there because they think it's their duty as community defenders to stop people marrying out of the faith. Similarly, 1984 rallies, some could be participating in those for social justice and human rights reasons, others as diasporic nationalists, others, for community defense reasons. So the point I'm trying to make is that I'm kind of trying to challenge the simple narrative of extremist, fundamentalist, radical, and say that there are different reasons why people participate in these different kinds of activities. So this is a list of conclusions, vague conclusions. Well, not vague. I mean, it's a list of conclusions that are in the report. So little evidence that Sikhs have been radicalised to commit terrorist acts. In the UK, there remains only one Sikh prescribed terrorist groups. Terms like orthodox, conservative, liberal, progressive, extremist, radical, fundamentalists often lose their meaning when used to generalise about groups of people. I mean, you can have, because conservative has often been used to describe Ummatari, but you can have liberal Ummataris, for instance. So I think these terms really don't do anybody any favours, as I said. The image of Sikhs in the media has generally been defined by the representations by the British colonial and Indian post-colonial states, particularly when they're agitating against state hegemony. And the presentation of Sikhs as extremists and radicals and fundamentalists has kind of re-emerged post-1984. The focus on preventing violent extremism in the post-9/11 context in Britain and the various Sikh-on-Sikh incidents which have occurred for various reasons have led to these recent concerns about Sikh radicalisation in Britain. So in terms of its impact, generally, one thing I'm just going to finish off here, but Mark Sedgwick says that one of the reasons why radicalisation is such a complex and often misunderstood topic is that it actually plays across 4 agendas: security agenda, the integration agenda, the foreign policy agenda, and the religious community agenda. So in terms of security, as I've kind of said, there hasn't really been. There were issues post-84, directly post-84, but there haven't been many issues regarding security since then. Integration issues in Britain, existing Sikh Muslim tensions, and the kind of Sikh Muslim narrative continues. And vigilantism is also an issue as well. Foreign policy related wise, relationships with the Indian state and religious community, you get different groups describing other parts of the community as extremist or radical or not, depending on their own relationships with the state as well. So I think I've said enough. My voice is kind of coming and going, but I'll stop it there. There are my that's the wrong slide. Well, that's just kind of I'll just there are my contact details here. So and just to show you this is my if you're interested in getting in touch, my contact details are on there as well. I'm on Twitter here, so I'll start. I think I've just gone over an hour, but happy to take questions. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Jasjeet Singh, for sharing that illuminating presentation and also for framing the realities of Sikh radicalization, especially following the media reports, and also presenting a question to us about the impact of these reports on our own communities. I think that's given me a lot to think about. You've also presented evidence from self-identifying Sikh activists, and your analysis of the historic and contemporary sources has allowed, personally, me to understand a broader context around this topic. So naturally, there's a lot of questions that our audience has. So I'd just like to remind our audience that please send us your questions along with your name or city, And if you'd like to verbally ask these questions, please confirm that you have a microphone, and you can ask us the questions in your control panel on your screen under the questions tab. So the first question that we have on deck is from Daljit Singh. His first question is, did you see any evidence of Indian government influence on the Sikh-on-Sikh conflict, especially in the Gurdwaras?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sal. That's a great question. Okay, so again, I think that the point I have to make is that given my research proposal, and given that I really only had 6 months of funding to do this in, I wasn't going in as an investigative journalist, so I could only really examine open source materials. Now, I spoke to 20 people. I didn't see any evidence myself, but that, as I say, but I'm not proud to say, I'm not so proud that I'll say that it doesn't exist, but I didn't see any myself. But the point is that wasn't really my that wasn't really what I was going in to look for. I think that would take an investigative journalist to kind of examine some of those issues.
Right, thank you. So there's more work to be done around that. Mm-hmm. The second question is, has there been any attempts in UK to create better Gurdwara governance policies to reduce the Sikh-on-Sikh conflict and tensions?
Okay, that's a brilliant question. Now, I'm hoping that my research makes a difference, which is why I've been so vocal about this. It's not, people have been saying, why are you saying that we're doing, Sikh on Sikh issues are the most issues, but the most frequent issues. But that's the point. I think actually presenting that as a slide and saying that there's all these resources being used against one another will hopefully, if it doesn't improve Gurdwara governance, it may hopefully encourage people to develop arenas where people can talk about issues before they become incidents. And yes, myself personally, am working on something that may help this happen. So, for instance, the Sikh Press Association, who I mentioned, hosted one of my consultation events, and have subsequently held a consultation event on mental health, and they'll be holding subsequent consultation events following that. Now, I think one key learning point from this is that Sikhs are willing to talk to one another, but they're beyond Facebook and social media, which isn't a great platform. I don't think we have the arenas to do that, and I don't think the Gurdwara is the right arena to do that, possibly because I don't know if this is true in other parts of the diaspora, but in the UK, Sikhs are very affiliated to their Gurdwara and rarely go to other events in other Gurdwaras. I'm not sure if that's the case in the rest of the diaspora. I'd be very interested to find out what people's observations are on that. And in fact, I'm throwing the question back to you guys. Have you seen in the US, Canada, Germany, wherever you are, have you seen any good examples of places of Sikh dialogue?
Well, just to provide my response to it, I know Sikri itself hosts a Gurdwara governance workshop, and I've participated in some in British Columbia and Surrey, and in Canada specifically, I've known that they've existed. So that's one platform, but that's an excellent question. What are some of the good examples of Sikh dialogue which can occur, and something that we all can facilitate to move this dialogue forward?
Yep.
Thank you. Another question we have, in fact, it's a comment to an earlier question that you had asked our audience today. Your question was along the lines of, what is the impact of the British news reports or British state's perception of Sikhs on the diasporic communities? So Arjun Tor from Vancouver is commenting that in Vancouver or British Columbia in general, the most prolific internal community conflicts have to do with personal factional disputes within the Gurdwara committees and Gurdwara governance issues, which is tied to your second question, which is like, okay, we do know that this is a very prominent.
Yes, I'm glad this is consistent, Vineet. Seriously, because this is obviously the issue that everybody knows exists, but if the point is, what do we do about it? But yeah, go on, yeah, you carry on, yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly that. So I think it's an excellent question for us to ask as we move forward. What are good examples of Sikh dialogue and Sikh governance? And if there are none, how do we come up with those answers, right? What is
Yeah,
a systematic approach we can take?
yeah.
Another question we have on deck by Daljit Singh is, did you find, as you interviewed, any activists as they got older or married to not get involved in affairs?
Very good. Yeah, yes, I think the josh of youth kind of only lasts a certain amount of time. So yes, certainly. I think once familiar responsibilities come on board, and the time taken, people do move away. I mean, what's actually interesting, and this is something I've written about in my research previously, is that the world has changed a lot regarding people's life cycle time. So that there is now a phrase of what is termed in the literature emerging adulthood. So the term the time period between the ages of 18 to 30, before people would get married a lot younger. They'd get married when they're 22. Responsibilities would then begin at that particular point. Now people, certainly young Sikhs in diaspora, are staying in education longer. They're marrying later. They are living with their parents longer. So the responsibilities of mortgage and all the like are coming on a lot later. So there's about a good 7 years now between from when you graduate, say 22, 23 to 30, where young people have got a lot more time to examine their identities and to participate in these sorts of activisms and issues. So I think that's certainly an important point to make, is that this does appear to be, certainly in terms of street protests, and also I also found people who've got a lot to lose wouldn't really participate in street protests. Or if you're employed in a particular company, if you're employed as opposed to working for yourself, for example, you've got a lot more to lose if your employee sees you on TV taking part in a protest. So there are also class issues as well, in terms of which kinds of class of people participate in these protests and events as well.
Well, that's very true. Another comment that we have to the question, what are some of the good examples of Sikh dialogue occurring in our communities? Daljit Singh is saying that there's very few places, but there are conferences, occasional conferences, that do tackle these questions. But he's concerned that there's no real ongoing actions that are being taken place. So the questions that we've raised in this presentation, what is a collective strategy to address these various concerns? What's the way forward? And that's also a question from Dave Singh as well.
I mean, I think an ongoing issue in the Sikh community and the diaspora and homeland, everything really is the issue of accountability, isn't it? And I'll be talking to lots of people. I think one key issue is that they see, because Sikhs donate generously, very, very generously, but the use of funds isn't always very, very clear. And I think accountability at a local level, when it comes to Gurdwaras, certainly. Accountability at institutional level, accountability, for instance, of the Akali Takht Sahib. I mean, really, we're in an internet age. There should be no reason why every Sikh doesn't know what the latest Hukamnama is, for instance. But I haven't found an online repository of the latest edicts. Why not? It's not something that's complicated. So the technology exists. We have a lot of Sikhs in technology companies, running technology companies. I think it's just a case of us realizing what these issues are and understanding that unless they are resolved, unless our communication mechanisms and accountability mechanisms improve, these sorts of concerns and issues are going to continue. And the point to make is that in the post 9/11 7/7 climate where the brown face is seen as somewhat suspicious. All these incidents and events kind of damage the perception of Sikhs across the world, really.
Right. And that impacts all the diasporic communities.
Absolutely, yeah.
Surinder Korkhera is asking, shouldn't all these dialogues, especially Sikh dialogues that we need to address in our communities, shouldn't they be happening in gurdwaras? Isn't that the function of a gurdwara?
It is, Benji. But as I said before, I don't know what the state is in the other parts of the diaspora, but if in the UK, if you have a city and one gurdwara holds an event in that city, it's rare that other people from other gurdwaras will attend that event. I don't know why that is. So the way I held my consultation events, none of them were held in gurdwaras. They were all held in independent venues. And another issue is that if I hold an event in a particular gurdwara, then people will tar me with belonging to that particular gurdwara, and it's very hard to remain independent in the Sikh community because everybody wants you to be their bunda. So it's a case of understanding that I think the best way forward is for and I don't know if this is possible in every situation, but if there's an independent or a safe space, to use that particular term, for these discussions. Gurdwaras have tried, but there's often too much personal and factional baggage in gurdwaras, which prevents lots of members of the community participating.
Right. And this question, I'm not going to address every question asked, but this question has been asked by multiple members already, and they're all wondering whether there is a community organization that goes across all different diasporas that is willing to or is already tackling any fundamental obstacles that stand in Sikh progress.
Well, I mean, one point I do want to make is that as an academic, I have to apply to research councils for funding, and what I know is that members of other religious communities have their own kind of research councils who will fund projects. So Christians have research councils, Jews, Muslims. Sikhs haven't got a central source of funding where projects can be undertaken. So I've had to apply to the government to undertake this research project. Now, that's fair enough, but I think if we want to progress as a community, we need to understand that if issues exist, there needs to be some kind of support for people who want to actually research these issues. I mean, I don't know what you thought about I'd really love to get feedback from those who are still on the call about the work that I've done, because I think unless we do systematic research, we haven't got anything to say. We can talk anecdote as much as we want, but unless we've got systematic research, and that requires some sort of central funding mechanism.
That's an excellent point. And again, we would really encourage everyone to give us feedback at the end of our session, as well as personally to Dr. Jasjeet Singh about his research as well. Dr. Jasjeet, there is another question, and here the audience is wondering whether you know of any UK Sikh organization that is progressively tackling Sikh community issues within UK beyond their personal gurdwaras.
Yeah, so there are a number of Sikh organisations in the UK. The Sikh Council UK has basically tried to get lots of gurdwaras together and become a kind of representative organisation for gurdwaras, and I've talked about my research to them as well, and that's great. I think this is a very good, important point actually. I think we're very good at presenting to the outside, and certainly I don't know if this is the case in the US and Canada as well. Certainly at interfaith events, we're very good at providing langar and the like, and hosting other members of the community, other communities, and talking to other communities about Sikhi. But not so much internally. No, now I think I'm hoping this is a bit of a watershed. I mean, not to big up my research too much, but I'm hoping that this really will make us sit as a whole community and diaspora sit back and think, hang on a minute, okay, we're great talking to others, but this is something that we need to tackle. So I know the Sikh Council have read my report, and it's something that they are working on going forward in terms of consultations and the like.
For sure. And at the same time, Dr. Jasjeet Singh, could you share with us your contact and email information again? So in order to do that, I'll just change the presentation to your screen, and if you could.
Yep, I will do. Let me just do this. Hang on a minute. Okay, so there. So this is my website. Oh, hang on a minute. Can you see that now?
We're just transitioning, I believe. Yes,
okay.
We can.
Okay, so this is my email address here, j.s.singh@leeds.ac.uk. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Jasjeet Singh. My website is arts.leeds.ac.uk/my name. So yeah, as I say, I'm not an expert, but I think it's important to start dialogue, and I've started with this particular presentation. So do please feel free to get in touch. I'm actually looking at doing a similar work in other parts of the diaspora. So if you're interested in getting me to do a presentation or doing some research, I'd be more than happy to do so. And that's why I really am very grateful to Sikri for facilitating this webinar and actually allowing me to engage with other parts of the diaspora as well, because each particular part of the diaspora has a specific context, I think. So if you look at the way in which Sikhs have developed in the US as compared to Canada, as compared to the UK, Italy, Germany, it's interesting seeing how the state has impacted on Sikh representations as well. But they have my contact details. Sorry, yeah.
So thank you for sharing your contact information once again. And I hope that our audience really gives you the feedback that you're seeking, as well as resources for you to come to North America and do some amazing research here as well.
Yep, sure.
So with that, Dr. Jasjeet, we are nearing the end of our time. Would you like to say any closing words?
Okay, yes. So as I said, well, firstly, thank you to everyone who's participated. It's been great as a first webinar. I hope it all went okay. This has taught me a few things. This project, as I say, it's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, given the title. But I think it's important that as Sikhs we are brave enough to tackle some of the issues that are in the community. I hope that it has made you think about how it might be useful. As an academic at Leeds University, if I can show that my research has made a difference, it's good for the university, it's good for me. So if for instance this webinar makes you set up some sort of Sikh dialogue forum in your local city, please do let me know. I really want to see how this is making a difference. And as I say, I'm happy to to come out as and when. But if you could let me know how it's making a difference, please send me your thoughts. Please send me your any other knowledge you have around the issue. If there's any critique as well, I'm not easily offended. So if you think I've got something terribly wrong, please let me know as well. If something you think I need to add in as well, then just let me know. Either way, all I'm saying is I'm open to feedback of all types, and I don't get offended very easily. So I look forward to hearing from some of you in the near future.
For sure. Feedback is key. And so with that, thank you, Dr. Jasjeet Singh. Thank you, audience, for all your questions and comments. And if your questions were not addressed during this time, please feel free to message either Sikri or Dr. Jasjeet Singh, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions on our Twitter handle or Facebook page or through our email addresses. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free and there's a cost associated with the technology. If you feel that you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to Sikri or becoming a webinar sponsor. If you'd like to present, please also get in touch with us. More details can be obtained in the follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sikri.org. As a reminder to everyone, please wait just a few seconds for the link to appear on your follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute as well as Dr. Jasjeet Singh, and we really appreciate the time you will take to provide us your feedback. As I end the webinar, on behalf of Sikri, I thank Dr. Jasjeet Singh for our e-Sangat today. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.